Well, hello, everybody, and welcome to what organizational leadership needs to know about roles and responsibilities regarding payroll. We're excited to have you all here today as we talk about what I know you believe is one of the most exciting topics and things that you need to address in your role with the organizations that you represent. It doesn't matter who processes your payroll, whether SKC does or you use another provider. As an executive, it is your responsibility to ensure that it's correct. It's probably one of the largest pieces of your budget, and your staff is also one of your most valuable resources in delivering on your mission. And payroll also, which we don't think about, has a direct impact on your board and their responsibility. And it's probably not something you or they think about, but if it goes wrong, it's something everybody would be thinking about. And we'll touch on that as we go through today. In this session, we're going to talk about how to approach your payroll. We bring our experience to this in us having to process and deal with payroll, as well as working with clients to address payroll issues and concerns. And sometimes those are things that have happened with current clients, and in some cases, clients that come to us and bring some past opportunities with us to learn from. You don't need to know details of payroll processing, but you do need to know enough to know when it's not right, and to ensure that the correct people have the information they need in order to process it correctly and efficiently. You don't have to be the one that does your payroll, like I said, but you need to understand it. You don't need to know everything. You just need to know enough to ask questions. And with that, we're going to go ahead and introduce ourselves a little bit more. I'm Jenny Vanderbout. I'm the Executive Director with Support Kansas City. I am not an accountant. I do not process payroll, and candidly, never really thought much about payroll until I ended up in this role. But it is my responsibility to review it, and it's my responsibility when it doesn't get done correctly to address and manage the impact it has to my staff. So Christy.
Oh, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Christy Covage. I am the CFO at Support Kansas City. Payroll, I have a hate relationship with. Of course, in my role in accounting over my years, I've prepared payroll, reviewed payroll. It's never been my favorite thing in the world, but I know how important it is. Here at Support Kansas City, I have prepared the
Oops.
So I think that knowing that it's not always people's first love, but carving out the time and knowing how important it is. And
just messaged her as well. So she probably knows she's having computer troubles.
We cannot. You have frozen.
Yeah.
oh, I'm frozen. Yeah, new computer having a little issue.
Well, we will go ahead and jump in, and hopefully we will be able to keep Christy because she is a key component in some of the rest of this conversation. So as we talk about organizational leadership, and I touched on a little bit of this in my opening, but as the executive, the organizational leadership or designee, these are some of the responsibilities, and we're going to go through and talk on each of these in more detail within our presentation today. We've broken each section into process and compliance. So talking about kind of internal process things, but also bringing up what the compliance issues are for you to be considering as you're thinking through this. This is not necessarily going to be a here's how to do it all. Here's all the things you need to be thinking about and aware of and how you might approach that. So you need to understand payroll. You need to understand your payroll schedule and why it's in place. and if it's the right payroll schedule. Understanding benefits, if there are any offered, and how that impacts your payroll processing. Know your staff's compensation, which seems obvious, I know. Know staff hours. And understand when overtime comes into play or other pieces come into play related to compensation and hours. Have written policies that you're able to adhere to, and review each payroll, asking questions as you go through when you don't understand something, so that if it's ever questioned down the road, there's more information. We mentioned in the opening a little bit about board responsibility related to payroll, and it's not something we think a lot about when we think about what our board roles are, although we know that they're financially responsible they're responsible for the financial stability of the organization. But from this Forbes article in 2019, we wanted to pull this excerpt out because it is something that we should keep in mind, is that the IRS has the ability to go after individual officers, directors, or check signers who could have done something about the payment of a liability. This would really come down to the taxes and other pieces of that. And board members could face personal liability that is often not covered under your D&O insurance. So just to add another layer of stress when you're trying to ensure the payroll is correct and your staff is getting what they need, there's all these other entities that also believe we should make sure that's right as well. So our first, we wanted to kind of walk through this logically and really start with payroll setup. And really this is under the first part would be that payroll periods. And this really is a process thing. It doesn't matter how you set up what your payroll periods are. But things to think about is understanding the impact of the different periods. So if you pay monthly, what that means. If you pay the first and second Friday, or first and third Fridays of the month, if you pay the 15th and the last working day of the month, if you pay for the 2 weeks, like you're always caught up, so they get paid on the 15th through the 1st through the 14th, or if you're always 2 weeks behind. With salaried employees, where there's not a lot of change between payrolls, some of that makes sense to never be 2 weeks behind. With hourly employees, maybe it is where they're off by 2 weeks, which then allows you time to review the hours, get them submitted, and not have a crunch trying to guess sometimes what employee hours might be in order to get payrolls processed. So really be aware of pay periods, be aware of what the options are and what makes sense for your organization. Have policies in place and sort out what those policies are. And we're going to talk more about policies as we go down further, but policies protect you, they protect the organization, and they ensure that there's equity and consistency with how you are managing your team. It also makes it so your team knows what they have in PTO and when that might increase and all of those pieces. Having your setup with your tax ID numbers, and that you have also set yourself up in every state as well as city that you might need to be paying taxes for.
All right. Can you hear me now? All right. And keep your fingers crossed, everybody, internet connection. I'm going to address compliance around each of these slides. As Jenny said, when you have workers in different states, and it is usually where someone is working, not where they live, and that is a confusing thing to many. So there's making sure that you have registration with the federal, state, and local authorities. It's different in every state, of course. So sometimes we even utilize for our clients specialized firm that helps people set up in states in which we're not familiar with. Choosing a reputable payroll processing platform. You may think, oh, well, that's Support Kansas City's job, or that's my other provider's job. It's very much up to you as leadership to know the type of platform that is being used, and if it's secure, if it's reputable, because there have been many stories over the years where someone uses a payroll organization or company because it's inexpensive, it's not very well known. They end up not paying taxes, and it's really up to the organization to pay those taxes, and they end up in a world of hurt. So knowing that that platform that is being used, whether it's Paychex, Paycor, Gusto, and understanding that as well is great. And with registration as well, I will say that a lot of times your payroll processors, like a Paycor or Gusto, will pay taxes on your behalf, which is great because you don't have to think about it. It's an automatic thing. But you should also know and have access to pay taxes if for any reason those payroll processing platforms were not paying your tax. That means you can get like an electronic filing number from the federal. You can get your own login at state and local levels to payment processing so that if anything happens, you are prepared and you have those numbers to pay your taxes. Another compliance item is something that you would see displaying your state posters. And what that means is if you go onto Amazon.com and do like payroll compliance posters, we have ours up in the office. It informs employees about their rights and also the employer requirements around like workers' compensation and things like that. So that is very important to have on the payroll setup. I think I saw a question real quick, maybe popped up about multi-state. Was that?
Yep.
Yeah, Kelly Gilbert asked, in this hybrid work environment, what defines circumstances under which we might need to set up new city taxes in areas where we aren't based, but where hybrid or work from home employees are based?
Oh, that is a great question. And I hate this answer, but it depends. It depends on the state. Each state in which you work has its own requirements for what is considered like working within that state, whether it's a day, whether it's 2 days. So you have to find out from the state. Unemployment's the same way, you know, if they're crossing state lines. I've had where people have crossed from Missouri to Kansas, Kansas to Missouri, and unemployment in that situation was really difficult. I worked in an environment where if I drove to St. Louis and worked, I had to log that I was sitting in St. Louis because they had a St. Louis tax. And when I was in Kansas City, Missouri, I had to log I was in KC-Mo versus Lee Summit. And it's almost like sales tax, wherever, you know, you were sitting and you were working, then it depends on each state. So if you're in California, it might be 2 weeks versus Missouri 1 week. So I would recommend asking questions, calling the state or working with your tax professionals to get that information for you. That's one reason why we like to use experts, because we're familiar with Kansas and Missouri, but maybe not as familiar with Illinois. So we will outsource some of that, those questions and the registrations for that.
Okay, so the next is policies, which we started touching on a little bit in the last one, and this is a huge piece, and we think of these as our human resources policies, but they really do impact our payroll and how we process it and how we manage it. And then obviously HR policies play a large role in protecting us in the organization. So ensure that when we're working with new organizations that are just setting up, that you've thought about the policies you need. If you're getting ready for your first payroll, have you thought about time off and what is that policy, and holidays, and what holidays are you going to pay for? What are your different types of employees that you are going to have? And how does that play out into how much time off they receive or how much of holiday pay they receive? Really thinking about all of those pieces so that you are drafting and documenting that. Many of these would generally have board approval. So having taken them to your board, especially around that HR policy piece, as we said, there is some board responsibility in some of these. And don't just write your policies and then let them hang out into perpetuity. Really be thinking about what a review schedule is on all of your policies, whether that's every 2 years, every 3 years, whatever makes sense for your organization, to really go back and say, is this still the right policy? If you have a board committee that really looks at those, to be talking about that, but make sure you're regularly reviewing and following what you have for your policies, because that's also what gives your staff that ability to make decisions for themselves as well.
On the compliance piece, and this is almost as simple as Googling payroll policies. There's a lot out there. So I picked a few and put them that are very basic. But the frequency of payroll, it's good to document. It is very important to really understand, as Jenny said before, if you pay every other week and end up with 26 pay periods versus pay twice a month with 24, that impacts a lot of things about withholding, benefits, and understanding the impact of your policy. So if, for example, health benefits, if I pay a portion of my health insurance and you withhold something from my check every month to put against those premiums, if I have 26 pay periods, you're going to have to recalculate it, because you can't just divide it by 24 pay periods. You're now dividing it by 26. So having a policy, understanding how that impacts the other policies as well. The time period the pay date covers, again, really important policy. You know, when does your pay period start? And what day? Is it Sunday? Is it Monday? Does it go, what is the cutoff? So does it go from Sunday to Sunday and then you get paid the Wednesday? So really documenting those type of policies. Timesheet and tracking, very important. A lot of times when you have restricted grants or when you are in multi-states, what type of timesheet and tracking are you using? Your PTO and sick policies, very important to document those because they have impact far beyond just running the payroll. It also impacts your accounting as well. Holidays, and making sure that you have identified the holidays or floating holidays that you will be providing. Timing of approval and submission, again, ties back to that frequency of payroll. Do you give enough time to turn that payroll around and have it be accurate and have a chance to review it? Here at Support Kansas City, we changed our hourly time period and not frequency, but the time period in which we were doing hourly employees, because we were having to estimate paid time off or holidays, and that didn't work really well. So we changed the timing of the period the pay dates covered. So that gave us plenty of time to review and submit the payroll. So now we can almost prepare the payroll about a week ahead, and barring any emergency. But that gives us a lot more time to discuss it if any problems arise. But we changed our policy about how we were doing payroll, and it made a really positive impact on us as an organization. Method of payment. It could be you're doing everyone direct deposit because that is just a policy that you have, or that they get paid by debit card or something, that you're not doing manual checks. Your policy is about paying out initial checks and final checks. There are regulations about when final checks are supposed to be paid that I think Kansas and Missouri, you really should be required to pay them out the day that they are terminated. So there's some regulation around that. And you need to be able to write those in a policy so that everyone understands what you need to do when you have your first paycheck and final paycheck. And then I also included expense reimbursement. Sometimes expense reimbursement is done through payroll, and that could be benefits for which they're like additional benefits, long-term care, life insurance, but even auto and other incidentals. So there should be a policy around expense reimbursement, especially if you're doing that as part of your payroll process.
So, there we go. Oops, we went too far. So I know everybody's favorite topic is to think about taxes and more compliance, but I think it's really important to at least educate yourself about what taxes need to be paid. So related to the question that Kelly just asked, those are the types of questions that you should be asking, especially as work has evolved and changed over the last several years, which is creating all sorts of new questions and things for us to think about. We just met with a new organization that's paying payroll and works in Kansas City, and we brought up the Kansas City tax, and she had no idea what we were talking about. And she's been who's been processing their payroll. So be aware of what those local taxes are. Be asking those questions, and ensure that you're thinking about it, and that you, as Christy said, have the ability to check. So make sure what you think is happening in your payroll. Of course, we're paying this tax. Well, be sure that you're paying that tax. And if not, as Christy said, do have the ability to log in and take care of that if needed.
We talked a little bit in a previous slide about some of the taxes and compliance, but saying it again just kind of pounds it in. But the tax ID numbers, we've had a lot of issues where people will hire someone in a different state and they'll start paying them and they won't be remitting taxes, or they don't have the research, or we don't know about it. Or we've had remote employees that move, and we've had to do research about, well, should they register in the state of Washington, and is there unemployment, and do we need a number? So knowing, or just thinking, you don't have to know. You have to kind of do that critical thinking about, okay, I've got someone, they're moving to Washington, what could possibly happen? Or they're moving to California, and we know a lot of things could happen because they have a lot of regulations. And then to be able to find someone that has the answers that you can inquire about your responsibility for tax ID numbers. Because if you get behind and you're paying people and you don't have the ID numbers and can't remit the taxes, it just compounds the issues. We talked a little bit about knowing the states you should be filing and the frequency of filing. That's something, as you're a small organization, as you grow, you might start out and be in Missouri and be very small. And so you're a monthly depositor. So you just pay your payroll taxes monthly. And then you hire 3 or 4 more people and your withholding goes up, and your frequency of filing is now, every 2 weeks. Or a lot of times we have quarterly filers that all of a sudden are monthly filers, and the state the state says you should be paying attention to this. We're not going to send you a notice. If we do, it's just because we're really nice and we want to do something for you. But if you hit their required filing, they expect you to pay monthly instead of quarterly. It's because you're supposed to be doing the math. And I think that's something important just to know about and think and ask, because Support Kansas City may not be aware of that you were quarterly and then monthly. I mean, we're in there, we're setting it up, but it really is part of leaderships to be like, yes, we are quarterly. I know that. We've talked about it. I've met with Support Kansas City. We've done the math. Or I've talked with Paycor. I understand what my requirement is in that state. And so I have that in another slide, but I will say it is carving some time out to address these things, because we know that you're all busy and you have a lot on your plate. So making sure you carve out time to start learning about this and be asking the questions is so important. And otherwise, your day gets filled up. We understand that. Workers' compensation, put that here. Again, each state is different. It's sometimes I'm thinking 3 to 4 employees before you hit a requirement for workers' compensation, but it's different in Kansas than it is in Missouri. I think it might be 1 or 2. That's where I have to go to the expert. But I do know we had a client that for some reason, they felt they dipped below the requirement, and then they didn't get their workers' compensation renewed for years. And then somebody turned in a workers' compensation claim, and they're like, oh, we don't have workers' compensation insurance. What do we do? So just make sure you have insurance, or you know why you don't have it. And then what other federal and state compliance is your organization required to follow? And you might be thinking, well, I don't know what I don't know. And that's where just asking, learning, networking with other leaders at other organizations. I know you don't like to talk about payroll, but it might be good to bring up over coffee or something like that.
So next we wanted to kind of talk about tools as you're trying to thinking through and managing payroll, because somebody else is processing that payroll, but as the executives, you are feeding that information. What is the compensation? If there's going to be an adjustment in pay, you would have approved that. Nobody else would know that unless you've approved that. How are you tracking that? Because one of those pieces, a team member makes a change in something or makes an adjustment in how many, whether they're a full-time employee or a half-time employee, just all of the pieces that you need to be able to track and manage. So the first is obviously the payroll platform, regardless of the organization that is processing your payroll, Paycor, ADP, whether Support Kansas City and Gusto, the platform that is set up is yours. So you should be able to log in. You should understand how to go and look at things. You should be able to go in and pull reports in whatever the payroll platform is. That is your organization's. You're paying for it. It's about your employees. Potentially create a checklist that you use each month as you're sending stuff off. Hey, were there any benefits changes? Were there any changes in compensation? Did we add a new employee? Did we terminate an employee? Are there things, did somebody adjust their benefits because they had a life event that's outside of the cycle? A checklist that kind of makes you jog through in a way that you're organizing your documentation and backup related to each payroll. So if there's a question about, hey, why does this look different than it did last month? You could, oh yeah, because this happened or because we made this change. really ensure within your process and payroll tools that you have a clear way and timeline related to, which Christy already talked about, but reporting and managing time of employees, that how do you approve it? Obviously, if it's an exempt employee, for hourly employees, what's that review process look like? Is there a task list for supervisors to review those payrolls by a certain date in order to keep the process moving? And what is that kind of the requesting and proving of time off, and how that then is tracked and managed. So when you get to the payroll, it's all already there. You guys are ready to send out to whoever's processing your payroll, or if you're processing the payroll, to be able to have everything at your fingertips to make the adjustments that might be needed.
The tools on the compliance side, I think we probably should have put leadership as a tool as well, because that you are part of the payroll process, and just understanding as part of compliance that even though you might be like, I'm not an accountant, so I don't want to deal with this. It's not my area of expertise. We've talked about that in previous slides, that payroll processing is what Paychex or even Support Kansas City is doing. That you need to have some internal control and some processes within your organization to get that information to the payroll processor. And the payroll processor is also your tool to kind of do their reasonableness check. They're the second look. They can ask questions to clarify. But what are your processes internally about keeping that information, or what does your filing system look like? Are you keeping a file on each employee? Are you keeping your I-9s and your documentation correctly? If you have an audit, the auditor will come in and question your process and want to understand your process around payroll, even your own leadership and what you're getting paid. So you might think, well, that's all Support Kansas City. They do our payroll. But there's always those things operationally that you will have to do internally to document and make sure that you have all the ducks in a row to get the information to the payroll provider and review it and make sure that it's correct. And that's all part of that internal control bullet point, that it is written, that someone is doing it as it is written, and you're looking at that and just kind of poking holes through it. Like, could we do it better and more efficient, so that we don't have the risk of someone getting paid incorrectly, not paid at all, and that they understand the process. The next bullet point is a secure exchange of information. If you are exchanging information, if you are sending information over for new employees or tax information, do not send it in an email. Do not attach their direct deposit voided check to an email. You should be providing that through our portal if you're using Support Kansas City, or that there's another secure, or it's a file that's zipped and password protected. Because if I can open up and see your employee's direct deposit, then, who knows who else could be able to open that up. So really think about the information that you're exchanging with your payroll processor, and how are you keeping that information in your files as well. Because I've been in organizations where I see employee files just sitting in the corner, and it's clearly labeled like employee files, and their social security numbers and checking account numbers, and that's not good. The payroll tools, as far as taxes and deductions, knowing what taxes you have to pay and deductions from the payroll, and that is, as we've talked about, you can't, it's very serious if you miss taxes. We all understand that. But then other deductions, and we'll talk about that on a benefits side, just really understanding those deductions and the impact they have on the payroll. And then we talked before, making sure that you have access to payment methods outside of the payroll platform. So that if Gusto decided that they were just going to shut their doors today, that you don't go, oh, I don't know how to pay my taxes, because the taxes are your responsibilities, not Gusto's. Gusto's doing it on your behalf and they're charging you for it. But at the end of the day, the IRS does not feel that that's a good excuse that, oh, well, Gusto just disappeared. No, they're like, you should have known, you should have been paying attention to the taxes that were due. So the payroll tools is just really understanding your resources that are out there and where you can go to find answers.
So we're going to kind of talk about, new employees, terminating employees, and related to new employees, and everybody has, your onboarding and orientation kind of process schedule. And there's things that really need to happen in the first day. And most likely they already are. But ensuring that your employee is set up in whatever your payroll system is. And many payroll systems today, you just need to set up their name and email address. So you don't have to have all that confidential information. And then the new employee will receive an email with a way to log in, set up their login, and they then enter. So it becomes not your responsibility, but theirs, how they're going to get their electronic funds transferred for their bank account, completing their tax forms related to the states. You've set the things up that they would need to trigger, but they then are responsible to going in and taking care of those things with an understanding if they don't by a certain date, they will not get paid within the pay schedule, which then goes back to policies that we talked about. But that alleviates some of the concerns around security and us and trading around information and then handwriting stuff out. And it also ensures that they play a role in that accuracy, and that's not something that you have to worry about. Did I mistranscribe a number? The other is to make sure that they understand the timeline for when any of the benefits you offer would take effect, and decisions that would need to be made, and by when those decisions would need to be made related to when benefits would take effect. So if they have a 401k and they can start paying in immediately, or that's after 90 days, if you offer medical and that starts day one, regardless, or the first of the month following when you started, or 30 days, the first of the month following 30 days of employment, which actually ends up being a month and a half from the start. Just an understanding with them, and then the understanding of when you need whatever their elections would be in order to have everything set up when it needs to be set up. You need this information to track and manage so you understand what's going on, but you also need to inform your payroll processor. Related to our medical benefits, our broker sorts out and then sends us something that we're then able to go in and double check that everything was set up. But in some cases, it may be the organization that's collecting that information and providing it to the broker. And the most important thing that you really, and this will go into compliance, and so we'll kind of lead that way, is on that first day of work, the I-9 has to be completed. And there's whole, we'll let Christy talk about the compliance around the I-9, but I know it's easy to let it slide. Oh, they didn't bring the documents or this and that, but it needs to be completed very quickly within the employment process, and definitely prior to a first payroll.
And regarding the compliance on the I-9, not only does it need to be filled out, but it is very important to fill that out correctly. You can fill it out, but maybe you didn't get the 2 forms of identification. And you think, oh, that's not a big deal. It is a big deal. There are I-9 trainings out there. I mean, I know my husband attended one because they, I think he had a friend who was a lawyer, did a I-9 audit. It was like, you're not filling those out right. And he totally was trying his hardest, read through all the instructions. They're very specific, establishing that citizenship. And if there was any questions, you want to make sure that you understand that I-9, how to fill it out, that it's complete, and that you have it filed and ready if anyone ever inquired about it. There's even special rules about saving them separate in a separate file and not part of the employee file, so that all the I-9s are together. So if you have any questions about that, it's really important to follow up and say, well, I think I'm doing it right. What do you think I might be missing? So the form's only as good as if it's filled out correctly. States have new hire reporting. That's what that bullet point refers to. A lot of the new hire reporting is now done through payroll processing. So like Kansas needs to be aware of who you hired within 30 or 60 days. And typically your payroll processing platform will do that for you. Direct deposit information. Jenny and I have found it interesting. We're like, just bring an avoided check. And younger people will be like, I don't have checks. I don't have a checkbook. And we're like, oh, yeah, well, bring in your banking information. Or, as Jenny said, we're catching up with the times. We will invite you. You can fill out your own direct deposit information through the payroll system. I think that's another thing that's the tool, like make sure that there's a lot of new and improved things out there that your payroll, if you've been with like a Paycor for a long time, there might be some really nifty new things that you didn't know about. And when we changed payroll platforms from a QuickBooks-based product to a recent one, what we really liked about it is the fact that you as leadership have more access to the information. The employees have more access to their own information. Used to, you weren't able to have a login as an administrator to the account that we were processing your payroll through. Now you have that. So if you ever need training or need information about how to access your information that you now have access to, we're happy to walk you through that. Prorated first paycheck. Brought that up because you might hire someone right in the middle of a payroll period, and there's some calculation that needs to be done. And a lot of times we have spreadsheets that do that. So it's pretty basic and standard, but making sure that you're calculating that right. Like I said, when the pay period starts and you're doing that pro rata first paycheck, takes a little more information. Documentation of wages internally and what you're putting into your payroll processor. I think that speaks for itself. Exempt versus non-exempt. I won't go too deep into this. This is about overtime. You should be aware of where your employees lie. Are they exempt from overtime, or are they subject to overtime? And if they are subject to overtime, are you watching that and calculating it correctly? And we'll get to it, but we'll talk about timing of benefits, and that would be health, retirement, or any other additional benefits that you might be offering.
So on the other end of the spectrum, we have the termination of employees, regardless of why they're moving on. There is a process that you really need to follow relating to your payroll. So obviously determining the last day, calculating what PTO may need to be paid out based on your policy, calculating the last pay amount. Is it a full pay period? Is it a partial pay period? Do you take insurance out twice a month? And you're going to need to make sure, even though it's not the end of the pay period, that you take out that second insurance. Inform the payroll processor, kind of what's that process there, so they know that there's a change and what these are going to be, and also informing your benefits provider related to removing that employee from the benefits packages that they're enrolled in.
And around compliance, really making sure that you pay them timely is important. You calculate the last paycheck correctly, but the allocation of benefit deduction is really important, because if you were taking out each pay period an amount for health insurance, but they only work the first half of the month, but they're getting health insurance coverage for the whole month, you want to make sure you get the whole health insurance coverage withheld from their last paycheck, or you've given them an additional benefit because you had to eat the cost after they have separated from employment.
So the next is the one that I always find most vexing, is related to wanting to provide additional, like up for a staff member that steps up and really takes on a special project or helps cover a staff that's out, or so bonuses, additional compensation, and gifts. So really you need to understand the market. First off, you need to understand the market and the setting of your compensation for employees, because you could be audited and questioned related to why you're paying this position $200,000 and really it's normally a $50,000 a year position. So really understanding that, documenting that, have a process and something in place for how you assess and award annual increases, how you determine and award one-time project compensation. And then a big piece is everything around bonuses, so related to those projects, and gifts, and understand the consequences of when you make a gift. Gift cards, while that always sounds like a nice gift, really is considered cash, and you have to then get it on the next payroll, so your employees will have to be taxed on that. If you give a gift that could be valued at more than $100, then that also has to be put on the payroll to be taxed. So it's frustrating at times when we're trying to do something nice to reward our team and keep morale up, but also needing to keep in mind this compensation and how that is going to actually impact their payrolls.
And regarding compliance, a couple of additional things. Hidden compensation issues are on there. And a lot of this sometimes applies to leadership, because the board wants to reward you for doing a really good job. And they'll be like, oh, let's just pay your health insurance for you. Or let's just go ahead and get you a life insurance policy and up that from the standard $50,000 and get that to $100,000. Or you can drive the car personally. So you have 100% use of the car. You don't have any other car. There are hidden compensation issues within that need to be vetted out and reported, like personal use of auto, or if you have life insurance benefits, that you're being taxed on those so that a proceed would not be taxable. So anytime someone's talking about compensating or rewarding someone for a job well done, if it's not getting reported through the payroll, you might step back and think, should it be, and have that conversation. So, and then assessing and documenting the comparable or where you got that information. But I really always harp on the hidden compensation issues, because we see them a lot and we're not aware of them until well after maybe W-2s have gone out. And then it's very hard to go back and amend and correct those hidden compensation issues if they aren't brought up before year end.
So benefits, which is my probably least favorite thing that I get to deal with in my role, but I'm sure others of you think it's your favorite. Really, you need to make sure you understand what all the options are, when they take effect, when they can be changed, when they end in effect, and know your resources. So you don't have to know all the answers. You just need to go where ask. I'm sure many of you are working with a broker if you have benefits, and we have ours on speed dial for questions, because this isn't an area that we're as well versed in as we probably need to be, although we've gotten much better. But be able to track what team members are enrolled in, be able to understand what they're enrolled in, and then when there's going to be changes, because there was a life event, and then be able to monitor those changes to ensure that those are deducted or reflected in the payroll for related to what those changes are.
Regarding compliance, a couple of items, knowing the rules. For example, we had a client that came to us that had just 3 employees, but had set up their retirement incorrectly. The IRS did a retirement audit. It was horrible. It was horrible. And it was through something like a Merrill Lynch, and it was very hard to unravel. And the previous executive director was gone. And so know the rules. And if you're going to start something, ask a lot of questions before you just go sign up somewhere, because it might be different because you're a nonprofit. Same thing with health and life and other supplemental insurance. Just know the impact. And if employees are paying a portion of that, reconciling the withholding on the payroll to the invoices that you get from the vendor, like United Healthcare. That's really important, because we have vision and dental, and we're always asking questions like, why is that person still on there? Or why is that person not on there? And they should be. So really paying attention to reconciling those things. PTO and your policy, and making sure that you're following that. And then we talked a little bit in the previous slide about taxable fringe benefits, that you need to make sure, are they taxable or are they exempt?
So really plan to review your payroll, or have somebody that needs to review your payroll each time before it actually is submitted for payment. Create a process for how you go about doing that. Pay close attention to hourly, new employees, terminating employees. Take more time when there's been changes to a payroll, when you have your benefits renewals, and you're just starting that out. Compare sometimes against previous payrolls. I'll go through and look at the previous one saying, hey, there should have been no changes. And then ask questions. If you don't think the numbers look right, ask questions before you just say, yep, I approve this payroll. Make sure you understand, or everybody makes mistakes. Something could have been submitted over wrong that you're now catching, or it could have been entered wrong when whoever your payroll processor is, but you could catch it before it's gone through submitting. It doesn't necessarily take hours, but definitely with attention to detail when you're looking at it.
I think also it is okay to ask to observe a payroll preparation. I have not prepared our payroll through the new Gusto system. And I said, you know what? I'm giving this presentation. I really need to do that. I've sat and watched our payroll preparation, and I should be able to do it if needed. But if you're like, I'm not going to do payroll, but being trained on review and what to look for, or even walk through the process with your payroll processor to understand what would help them not miss something, to double check their work and to get the information to you correctly. So remember to review your own processes and your procedures, and it's a risk management thing that you should do as leadership. And document your review and approval. Our auditor asks us for documentation of payroll approval each year. They will pick a random payroll and say, show us where you reviewed and approved this payroll.
So one other piece to really consider is when the new year starts, that if you have all salaried employees and there's not a lot of changes, you're making sure things are running. You don't have a lot of hourly, but at the new calendar year, you really want to make sure you do a deep dive into your payroll in your review. You want to make sure compensation changes were done correctly, any changes to PTO accrual rates. Were there any changes to benefits? Did your open enrollment just occur? Take a little more time and just review more closely to ensure that it's all set up from the beginning the way it should be.
Some other items, making sure that you have received or know your new unemployment rate if it applies. We talked before, is there any change in filing frequency of tax deposit? Benefit renewals, those are always something would love to sit and walk through your benefit renewal if you have, once you get that from your provider, so that we are ensuring, if we are the payroll processor, that we are deducting correct amounts and even reporting the correct company portion of payments. Reviewing employee withholdings for reasonableness. Jenny mentioned the benefits rollover. Reviewing the prior year forms for accuracy. And again, it's your responsibility to archive your own forms. I know you can log in and get them or ask Support Kansas City for those forms. When they are provided to you, please make sure you have a method of archiving and storing your documentation according to your document retention policy.